So the rough cut stage really is focusing more on the overall structure. What are the main story beats? So in the early phases, barring some tragic set accident that messed up the audio, we're not worried about sound. We're not worried about color. We're not worried about graphics. We're not worried about visual effects. We're not worried about the exact frames for any specific cut. We're worried about the big picture, the literal video picture, the story from start to finish. We're definitely working to refine the pacing of each scene and make everything flow. We definitely always have the pacing of individual scenes and the revelation of information in the back of our minds. But when we're dealing with rough cuts, it's not refined enough yet to start playing with individual frames or nitpicking specific performances. Right now, it's about viewing the entire video as a whole and setting up the flow of the story from start to finish. So filmmaking in general, and editing specifically, is this fine balance of pursuing the exact intended long-term goal while also discovering it. See, I knew that I was getting hired on to a home renovation show. The director-producer knew that she wanted a 45-minute episode and knew exactly the main beats of that episode, where the house was going to start and where the house was going to end up. But she didn't necessarily know the exact order of the scenes. She didn't necessarily know the length of each scene. It seems like an oxymoron because obviously you go in intending to create a specific product. On the reality TV show, we actually had a formula down to the time code about when certain parts of the story should start and end. But even so, every episode is slightly different, and you're discovering what beats fit which places. A lot of your first rough cuts are gonna suck. And that's okay. You're putting your concept through the process. You're trying all the things that don't work. Especially in the early parts of the editing process, I think it's important to keep your cut kind of safe. We've talked about the importance of feedback before, but I think it's also important to emphasize that you should only get feedback when you're ready for it. With all of my bigger clients, whether it's advertising or television, I usually told the director that they weren't allowed to see anything I did until at least a week into my editing process. I usually wanted to get one or maybe even multiple assembly cuts of different forms out and go through at least a couple of rough cuts before I was comfortable showing it to the director. I usually want to be in a fine cut before I show it to the client. When you're first playing around with an edit, it's just a bunch of loose ideas in your head. And while you might have a vision of how the story ought to play out, you probably haven't found that pacing and the correct structure yet. And so showing it to anyone else and trying to gather feedback when you still have more that you can do on it yourself just is not constructive. I'll usually be willing to have an edit session with the director when I'm getting close to finished with the rough cut process, when I think that this is in a pretty good place and I need to get directorial feedback on potential structural changes so that we can do all of the big renovations before we move into fine cuts. As the editor, you have to use your imagination, especially in the earlier phases, to understand where this video is going. It's actually, weirdly, a skill set on its own to be able to watch an unfinished, unrefined cut and understand where it's going and see through the cracks in order to know what feedback to give and what feedback not to give. You have to pick your battles. When you're first starting out, it is not helpful to color correct an image, because you don't even know if you're going to necessarily use this particular shot. It's also important to get a little bit used to using your imagination. You very well will probably be editing with ugly proxies. If there's any visual effects involved, you'll be looking at green screens, tracking markers. A lot of the visuals just simply won't exist yet. A lot of times in rough cuts, you're going to be focused so much on the overall structure of the video that you won't even have placeholder graphics, let alone actual graphics in the video yet. My main goal when I'm in the rough cut stage is to chip away as much of the roughness as possible. I'll go in and explore one specific scene for a little while, polish it up a little bit, kind of decide how I want the information to fall and find some good takes. And then I'll back up a little bit and I'll go look at a different scene. And it's a continuous process of backing up a little bit, looking at the whole and structuring the story overall, and then going back down in with a fine-tooth comb and checking over individual scenes.